it's of course very appropriate. I was asked to play a little Debussy today. It was one of Jimmy's favorite composers. Of course, he loved so many composers. Hard to pick any favorites in a sense, but how appropriate that music of kind of magic and perfume and mystery would be something that he loved dearly. And just as naturally, of course, he had so much to offer on the subject, in addition to the lectures, that he wrote a brilliant book all about those Debussy preludes. And also, just as naturally, you can only find that book in Japan and read it in Japanese. So a little bit of a wall to get through there. But if you can do that, it's really quite a fabulous book. I had thought not to tell too many Jimmy Bloch anecdotes here today, although Stuart Isikoff pushed me to a couple of them, and that's particularly appropriate. This is Stuart's fault that he urged me to do my student days impression of Jimmy, who was very fond of entering the classroom with the hand upraised like so, and I just remember the door swinging open wildly as he walked in the most imperious way imaginable, and announcing to the crowd, "I've just returned from Fiji, and you?" Of course, he was always the most witty, urbane, elegant, and sophisticated man in any room, and he had a magic aura that one was drawn to. And when I found myself trying to summarize that sense in words, I kept coming back to the sense of passion. He had such a passion for art and literature, and for the piano, of course, for learning and erudition in general, fine cuisine and travel and so forth. He showered this passion upon us on so many generations of pianists, and I always feel that my greatest gift from him was a similar lifelong passion for music, which he passed on to me. I knew him, I realized in looking back, for so many decades, first as a teacher here, and then unforgettably, he mentored me through my first piano literature teaching job at the Manhattan School. He actually came and watched me lecture a little bit, and if you think nerves can be caused by playing a piano recital, let me tell you, lecturing piano literature, Frescobaldi and Froberger in front of that guy, oh my God, that was in some ways a nightmare, but especially the last few years after I had moved to the West Coast, I always made it a point when I came to New York 2 or 3 times a year to have a Joseph Bloch day and go to Larchmont and see him. And I'll skip kind of the funny anecdotes, much more in preference about one particularly very, very treasured story that I feel so fortunate now that I actually shared with him the last time I saw him, which was in November when Stuart Isikoff and I drove up to visit him. I don't know how this story, it's a very simple one, very nondescript one, came up in the midst of all this erudite kind of conversation, but it did. Somehow we started talking about old days at Juilliard when I was a student. And he actually asked me what did I remember most about those days. And this very treasured memory came to mind of a very, very nondescript, otherwise, typical spring day in the Easter time of 1978. And we had a guest, it was the pianist Andrew Rangel, came and played the Concord Sonata for us. The first time I had heard it, a fantastic performance, of course. And I was 18 at the time, so I was kind of flabbergasted that at the end of class, Jimmy looked at me and said, "Would you like to join us for lunch?" And, to me, this was one of the great honors imaginable to, as Jimmy often said, by the way, he would say, to come and be able to sit at and touch the hem of his garment. So I joined them, and I think now, in deference to myself, who was rather broke at the time, that instead of going to a restaurant, they grabbed a couple of sandwiches, and with paper bags, we set out for Central Park. And as mentioned, it was just one of these incredibly beautiful spring days, and the sun was shining. And I remember thinking as we sat there on the park bench, and the conversation turned to, I recall, Clementi, Duschek, George Frederick Pinto, and Scarlatti. I remember trying to decide which was brighter, the beaming sunshine of the beautiful day, or his crinkling eyes and unforgettable smile. But in any case, telling him this story in November and how happy I felt that day just to have an hour in his company, he beamed that same smile again and said to me so gently, "Oh, I'm very happy you told me that." A few years ago, I stumbled upon some rare piano music by the pianist Michel Bloch, who has also passed away at this point, but a beautiful set of pieces in which I found this piece I'm going to finish with here. It's called Le Réveil, or as Michel Bloch translated it, the perfect hour. And it surprised me when I bought the music, the title page. It's dedicated to Jimmy, and they consist of 6 pieces that he wrote himself as a student in those piano literature classes in the 1950s. It seems that Mr. Bloch had asked them all to write short piano pieces in the style of Ravel to help them, garner a sense of the style of French music. And I guess it's come to mind on this occasion, and I know I'm always going to think of Jimmy when I play this piece now. I think of how many perfect hours I had with Joseph Bloch, and how lucky we all were to have so many of those perfect hours with Joseph Bloch. I think I'd like to ask you also, at the end of the piece, that skip the applause. Thanks.